movement slides into focus on shimmering pavement. Hair braiders, drummers, portrait painters, acrobats, charlatans, shoe shiners, ranters, henna queens, drag queens, the next Marsalis, the next Vermeer, the lucky dog's seller. In yesterday's clothes, in sleep-deprived glory, hungry, hungover, resolute, weary, today, as every dry day, they return to carry on or to try again. In here, though, it is cooler, dimmer. Drive and vocation are simply rumors, and action seems borderline indecent. In the Cafe Pontalba, it is very pleasant. The next poem I'm going to read is the first poem in my book. It kind of set the theme and the tone for the whole book. And also the title of my book is taken from a line in this poem. The poem is Mikael. That is Hebrew for Michael. When you see El in a Hebrew word, it always means God. And so Mikael means who is like God. And we're talking about the archangel Michael, as we call him. And Emmanuel means God with us. So in the book of Revelation, the archangel Michael, defeats Satan in battle in heaven. So Michael is always God's warrior. He fights against evil. And this is an end times poem. As I was putting together my collection, I realized I had a lot of poems about the end times, so I guess that's on my mind a little bit. I've given him a prophetic voice in this poem. Mikael. You lull yourselves with dimple-handed cherubs, simpering in your étagère half naked. Small-breasted maidens, tissue-winged and swooning there on your desktop. All those complacent, fleshy pastel eunuchs posing with harp or horn on the Christmas mantle. You underestimate to your own peril whom we have come from, whom we are acting for, and it's too late now. Suddenly, it's too late to ask for mercy. Mercy is what you'll get, his wide-armed mercy, but you won't like it. He has been with you at your elbow, lovesick, down the millennia. He knows you deeply, yet still encumbers your black hearts with blessings. Willing, unwillful swain, he has wept and waited while you mocked him. Finally now, the muscles of his jawline clench and unclench beneath that holy shadow. Enough is enough. Don't act as though some game's been played unfairly. He's never skimped on profits since he breathed you out of the mud and on your way to heaven. Yours for the asking. But you were too intent on what you'd crawled from. You can't begin to dream what you've rejected. What we would give to need his fierce salvation require his dying. Love like a conflagration shall be yours now. Love like an April river, like a temblor. Love like an avalanche, a midnight bomb blast, finding you hidden, shrieking the air with shards of stained glass windows. Love like a sunstorm, sweeping before it nations, continents, galaxies, and all your hubris. Yes, say your prayers now. This is your precious moment. I its angel, angry and dark and terrible. God with us, Emmanuel, comes bearing yet more mercy, but you won't like it. So let's do something a little bit lighter. Anything's lighter than the end of life as we know it, I guess. On page 63, I have a very short poem. So we all know about David and Bathsheba. David wants Bathsheba so badly that he has her husband killed. It's clearly all about lust and power for him. But what about her? We never hear anything about that. So this very short poem is in her voice, as I imagined it, on the third day of her marriage to King David. It's called Bathsheba on the Third Day. Hot, hot, hot is all those spooky crows can think to say. We ought to have some people over, take in a funny show, redecorate this tent. Aren't you listening, lover? We'll just have to invent our own fun. Take a course maybe in the fall. And then, oh, please, babe, not again. We never talk anymore. The next poem is also very short. I could squeeze a lot of poems into my 20 minutes here because my poems are almost all very short. This one is a poem where I was simply trying to use the power and the music of language to communicate something I enjoyed. Page 18, it's called Bourbon Neat. Thin to a filament of fire and fall, web of hot wire, down my dark veins, to bundle me in my black root hollow. What heat you lose, such heart I gain. Such heart I gain, pale amber swallow, kindles the bone where you coil and hiss. Whose supple lover on a silk pillow seizes the blood in a blaze like this? And on page 14, we have Ophelia. She is a character in Shakespeare's tragedy, Hamlet. Ophelia has a hard life. She has a busybody father. She has a very unhelpful boyfriend, Hamlet. And I don't want to give too much away, but she drowns. Of course, in a very beautiful way. Maybe accidentally, maybe not. So on page 14, this is Ophelia. Here the girl gazes hard at the water as it replaces itself with a shiver. Over sand, coily. Around rock, torrential. All interstitial rages this river, holding together both its banked boundaries, with its pure absence, with its cold leaving. All interstitial, endless departure. Nothing is permanent, but it's deceiving. There is no weight here. There is no color. Nothing of substance, shadow and glare. And yet, how solid seem those deep shadows. Dark underpinnings not really there. I'm going to do just a couple of more poems. On page 16 is Last Things. This doesn't need a lot of introduction. Like Mikael, It is me imagining how the end times must be. Last things. In all that you attempt, you will find success. No, near sublimity, save for a flaw you can't define, the perfection of wax roses. Somewhere, a man who wants your vote next fall will kiss a tyrant, tour his model prison. Well, most of it. You'll hit your child. The bruise won't disappear. Straight out of Revelation, a goose will court a cow for 7 years. Men will make babies any way they want to. Start them in Dixie cups, sell them to various wombs. When the kids learn what they've gotten into, preschool dial-a-porn won't make them curious. Fidelity will be an anachronism. What idiot would tie that knot forever? And you will live from spasm to exquisite spasm. Your life a rush, your happiness a quiver. Then the phone will ring, the caller hang up quietly, just as you get it on with your neighbor's wife. You'll check your locks and alarms and revolver nightly, stock up on scotch and pills, put your jewels in the safe. Yet early some morning, wouldn't you know it, just as you pop an oxy, there's that dreaded knock. He leans on your doorbell, arms full of Bibles. Christ! Sometimes it seems like you just can't catch a break. And the final poem I'm going to read today is on page 22. A number of years ago, I tripped and fell and broke my wrist. And I really did hear the break. So this poem is about that and maybe about something else too. After the fall. The sound was everything I'd read it was, and more. Soft and precise, a single apple dropped on sodden ground. Now time is measured from that sound. Not in my ears, but roiling through my marrow swept a sudden sorrow. Then the epiphany, sick rushing knowledge that I had done irreparable damage. Never again the luxury of ease or happy thoughtlessness. So innocent and careless was that life before. Now the world's unsafe. The smallest gesture feels as if it matters, this side of the fracture. And I consider long where to place my feet, always aware that it's too late. Thus ends my reading. Thank you everyone for being here today, and I'm going to move right in to my introduction of Marley Youmans. She is the author of 15, that's 15 books of poetry and fiction. Her most recent book of poems is last year's The Book of the Red King from Phoenicia Publishing, and her most recent novel and the book that she will be reading from today is just out. It's Charis in the World of Wonders from Ignatius Press. Welcome, Marley.
Thank you, Jane. Jane and Sally requested romance. So I am avoiding all the hard things in the book in this reading. I'm reading 3 fragments from Charis and the World of Wonders. In the first one, we leap into a sort of 1690s Puritan Massachusetts Bay Colony Romeo and Juliet encounter with Charis and Jotham, who have seen each other but only spoken briefly. Charis is working as a seamstress in the rather unattractive household of Goody Holt. The next day, Mistress Holt barred me from my midday walk with a feeble but firmly voiced excuse. But on the day following, I crept out without telling anyone. The women of the family were entertaining the young pastor in the parlor. Evidently, he was reading to them from Cotton Mather's memorable providences relating to witchcraft and possession, as he had promised when invited to partake of tea. I paused and heard him reading a passage about the devil attempting to lure a boy in the colony, telling him many stories of Dr. Faustus and other witches, how bravely they have lived, and how he should live deliciously and have ease, comfort, and money, and sometimes threatening to tear him in pieces if he would not. And I slipped out the door. The minister's words lingered in my mind as I paused to listen before the house, so that I wondered if I could be like the boy, sliding into sin through the desire to live deliciously. But no voice called me back, and I shook off the thought. I had seen the work of Satan up close and knew something about the stamp of his presence. Still, the risk was high. I might be whipped for wanton dalliance if accused of visiting a man. And what else was I doing? Was I indeed wanton? A memory of the face of the goldsmith and the spark of his touch had returned to me more than once when I was alone in the sewing room. I kept my head down in passing the front windows. As I walked away, I felt a twinge of sympathy. Bess was stirring a wooden tub of laundry outside the wash house. She stopped to wipe her nose with the hem of her apron and did not see me. Behind her, the ever-escaping speckled pig rooted in a mess of corn stalks. I hurried on as quickly as if I had joined Mercury's wings to my heels. Soon I reached the shop and glanced in the front window at the silver. The night before, it had rained, and I leaped a little wavering stream to gain the square of bricks set before the door. There I paused to look about me. All was the same, save for the borderline of the rivulet and a loud ringing noise that came from the side yard where a boy was hammering an ingot to flatten the silver. I curtsied when a finely dressed gentleman came out of the shop, his gaze bent on a handful of gold buttons. Some visitor from Salem, perhaps, one who could afford and merit cloth of deep black and a touch of lace. He hardly glanced at me, but prayed my pardon and went on, the treasure now locked in his fist. Once inside, I leaned against the door, the bell tinkling. Mr. Herrick must have passed into the back room, for the curtain was still stirring. I shall return post haste. The sound of his voice startled me, even though I had come expressly to talk with him. Suddenly weak-limbed, for I'd eaten nothing since a dish of tea with milk in the early morning, I longed to sit. Most of all, I wondered what he had to give me. What had my brother left with his school friend? The noise of the mallet from outside died away into silence and began again, beating faster than before. The goldsmith ducked under the curtain and saw me and was still. Ah, he said. Mr. Herrick, I said, and stopped there, not knowing what greeting suited the moment. I am right heartily glad you found a way, he said. I was afraid Goodwife Holt would not let you quit the house. Yes, I said, but I have the favor of a daily walk. I am glad, he said, though he looked solemn. She has the renown among gossips of being the dragon of Andover. However it is, I have found her fair in her dealings with me. I smiled at this description, but made no reply. John had once explained to me that Goody Holt resembled a porcupine, a curmudgeonly waddling beast that was said to shoot its quills, barbed and magical, at anyone who strayed too near. Do you mind that we are alone? Not many come to the shop. No, I said. He drew back the cloth and beckoned to me. The back room shone dully with metal, chargers and cups and some pewter plates, but we met beside the curtain in the shadows. His hair gleamed in the darkness. The first time I sighted you across the room, I recognized you, he said. I knew who you were, even though when I had seen you last, you were still small. I knew it in my bones. I knew it the way a touchstone knows the gold. And I knew that I wanted to meet you. I didn't speak, but turned my head away from him. Forgive me for being rash and headlong, over hasty, he added. The silver call to me seemed to announce that here was one who was caught by beauty and who aspired to make marvels. The pulse at my neck quickened, whether it was from his words or from the strangeness of being alone with a man in the shadowy and silvery chamber. When I met his gaze again, the goldsmith went on. You don't recollect me, but I feel as if I understand you. I felt so when I glimpsed you at the meeting house. I don't know why that could be, except that I saw you and sensed that I would come to know you. To be understood is sweet, and something I thought lost forever, I said. But how could that happen? A kind of light shone around you. To me, you were like a dove glimmering in the midst of crows. I know the royal nature of gold. And at that instant, I felt alchemically changed by grace, and that all of me was malleable and perfect like gold. It sounds like bedlam madness to me now, but I loved you and wanted to be with you always. Does that sound like madness? Perhaps, I said. No, I do not know. I remembered my words to Belle, saying that a young woman with no fortunes and no family and no place to meet and court was not likely to wed, unless a man be bold, honorable, but impetuous. His fingertips found mine and our hands laced together. Where we touched, I seemed more alive than I had been since leaving our house near Falmouth. My pulse flickered like a bird's. You are milk and flame and gold, he said. Your white skin, the changing reds of your hair in the different lights of the sun. I dreamed about us last night. I think about you all day long. The fire of a blush rose in my face, so that I was glad of the curtain's shadow. My skin was ever a betrayer of my feelings, as bold as a white cloth stained to red with the dye called Kermes berries. That he desired my company was pleasing. I did not ask myself how much I wished him to say, or how well I wished him to make use of this time that might not come again. To be alone with a man was a rarity, and even more so to be alone with Mr. Herrick, the goldsmith. Goodwife Holt would make sure of that. But now we were together, and I could feel the blood moving in his hand and the slight roughness of the skin, calloused from working the metal. The scent of him was pleasant, a musky mixture of sweat with ambergris. Pardon my forwardness, that I have dreamed of you, and that even now I may be profaning your maiden privacy with my touch. We stood silent, but when he made as if to release my hand, I spoke. I would not be called too quickly one, I said, and should be more strange and distant. But in traveling through the wilderness, I may have lost all rules of courtesy and sense of how to behave. You don't yet fathom me, he said, and such sudden loves may seem too rash. Yes, I said, and unadvised, he said. Yes, and dreamlike and frail, not likely to endure, he said. Yes, I said. But would you marry me, he said, but not as if it was a question, more like words in a trance. And all the time the vein at my wrist flittered and said that I was already his. But fear of my own wild impulse was in me also. I might have been skimming along Falmouth Cliff, about to jump into the waves below. Yes, I said, yes. Forever and ever, he said, as if this life could go on without change. If your bent toward me is as bright and pure and sterling as your own hammered silver, or more, like the miracles of gold that the wise men from the East carried. It is, he said, like the star that stood over the babe and his mother, like the night feels when there are no clouds and the stars are spilled. Yet how can I be sure when I know so little of you? You must sense it already, surely. We are both so solitary. We have fallen out of the world, all our people dead, and our former places know us no more. But I love you, and I will love you more when I learn your ways. Will you marry me, he said, again, not as a question, but dreamily. Yes, I said, again, yes. My feet, so long careful, now seemed to skip from secure ground, and this time I added, I will. His face was close to mine. I could feel something sparking and lighting between us, as when a bolt of brightness is turning in the atmosphere, enlivening the motes of air, and abruptly I feared that the moment would flash away as quickly as lightning, leaving nothing but shock and a smell of sulfur, a devilish perfume. Call me Jotham, he whispered. Jotham, I said, feeling the power, the intimacy that sleeps inside a name and wakes when a woman is given the right to say a man's Christian name. And I gave him the right to my forename in turn. Charis, he said, the marvelous red and white grace of Charis. His lips discovered mine in the dark. My pulse flicked faster and faster and sent out stars like struck flint. Our veins turned to white flame that ran from one to the other. For how does a woman feel when she is first touched by desire? I was a tree of liquid silver that budded with white flowers and erupted in white leaves inside his embrace. We were more, orchards of gold fire and flower. For a long time I leaned against him, caught and burning, yet unconsumed. Some moments stand like landmarks on a journey, as when Jacob crossed the river and wrestled until he won a new name and a blessing. And though he was lamed, all things seemed new. The morning leaped from the horizon, and there was the gold of light. Afterward, when the boy who hammered at silver ceased his pounding, and we returned to the shop, I looked around and saw the world had altered. The flintlock above the hearth floated close to the wall. The silver by the window seemed buoyant on the shelves, as if the bowls and teapots were planets that might lift and whirl around my son. For I felt glowing, radiant in the gloom. A little branch of red coral burned among the silver, along with a tiny dish of moon-bright pearls and a chunk of lapis lazuli, its deep blue like something quarried from the depths of the sea. The second and third fragments get smaller and smaller. In the second one, we meet a strangeness that belongs to the 1691 winter in Massachusetts Bay, which was perilously cold and when rivers froze. And Charis has to escape with her now husband, her baby, and her horse across the frozen Merrimack. Doesn't seem to freeze anymore, but it did freeze as late as the late 19th century. So it was that I ventured onto the ice under starlight, stopping once to look back at Samuel on his sled and at Jotham Herrick and Hortus, and all my longing was for them to be snug with me on the other shore. Before me, I carried the colander of coals, linen strips wrapped around the handles to protect my gloves. When I imagine that hour, I see a figure holding a pot of flame creep from rock to rock. The dome of the sky is a dark, upside-down colander pricked with white fire, and the trees are black scratches along the shore. But up close, the footing was treacherous, and I feared to slide or stumble and spill the bowl. My thoughts often turned to the current below, eating at the ice. If it gnawed too quickly, the new-made ice would not keep up, and the solid plain would be too thin. Earlier, winds had blown much of the river's snow away, and the light made the ice luminous where it was not dusted or heaped with flakes. The ice cracked and boomed under my pattens. I dived onto hands and knees and lay at full length, my cloak spreading over the surface. The colander skidded away, striking a chunk of ice and spitting out sparks. The jolt kicked a red-hot fragment onto the surface. Have mercy, I cried to the stars and God in heaven. Selvages of fractured ice grated together, and air punched through to water. Now I could hear the Merrimack sing of drowning and death and indomitable flow. My husband shouted, but I could not make out the words. The ledge of rock beside me radiated cold. How long since I had slept? A wave of weariness washed over me. Samuel, Jotham, Hortus must scrabble and strive. Already the ice had seized hold of my cloak as if it meant to freeze the cloth and me to itself. I swam with my arms, pushed forward with my toes, gathered myself and thrust again, and slid on the ice. Getting onto my hands and knees, I crawled forward to the pot of fire and slowly stood, swaying a little. Must needs be unconquerable. God help me. I bent to pick up the colander. The lost coals seethed against the ice, sending up a small plume of smoke. Behind me, Jotham Herrick whooped his encouragement. Once, years back, my brothers and I saw a river otter, a sort of weasel creature, tumbling on a frozen river. How easily she moved across the surface, alternately gliding and wriggling and rising humpbacked in readiness for another slide. The current of her very being was playful and fluent, moving like a stream. She was a joyful Merrimack of the animal kingdom that flowed where others loped along the ground or darted in air. But I did not belong on the ice that was sometimes white and sometimes clear or shadowed to blue and green, nor did I belong in the quiet, cold chambers underneath where the starlight was muted into near blackness and the chilly fishes hung, gently fanning their tails and fins. I did not wish for the Merrimack to be my Jordan. And though my people have a hatred for night walking and fear of what lurks in shadows, I had come to know shade and pitch. Deep darkness was not darkness alone, but speckled with light. A glory shone around moon and stars and glowed from clouds. Hortus's breath, mine, Samuel's, and Jotham's were likewise spark catchers made from tiny drops of crystallized breath fanned into the night. Still, I feared the river's flow and dropped to my knees or flung myself prone 3 times as I traversed from rock to rock, though by the time the slick, snowy bank loomed ahead of me, I was more afraid for the others than for myself. I was cold and damp, but again I had survived a crossing. Evidently, I was a surviving kind of person, tenacious of life, and I thanked God for whatever core of vigor burned in me, and that I was made so, and that I had possessed wondrous gifts of hardiness and help to remain alive. The colander of the heavens was a pale glory of scattered light as I knelt down and reached for the bank, hauling myself upward by roots and stalks, digging the spikes of my pattens into the crust of snow. My colander flame still snapped and burned, and I set to making it into a larger fire. Jotham Herrick stepped onto the ice, dragging our child by one rope and the train of our packs by another. The third requested fragment is a teeny one, and it makes a kind of closure to the dangerous river crossing. And Jotham is the first to speak. I will never fail to remember the sight of you walking and sliding across the river with a vessel of fire in your hands. I expect, Mr. Herrick, that we will recollect this night for many a year, though I am tired enough to sleep and forget it forever. Indeed, I shall not forget the night when I lost my crucibles but kept my wife, and the swap is a well-struck barter. Look there. I pointed up at the strangest thing I had seen all that wild, extraordinary night. How astonishing, my husband said softly. A branch, confused by this hardest of winters, had flowered in the midst of ice and snow. Faintly bathed by starlight, the petals seemed to shine from within. What is it? And what does it mean? Jotham reached up as if to touch the branch, but paused, his hand open. We have had no spell of warmth, but only brute cold this season. Perhaps a fair sign for us, I said. In the midst of a cruel winter, we shall flourish. And if the whole world should turn to ice, we should still blossom and be filled with light. But the flowers will die, cursed by cold, my husband said. So I do not know. A sign, yes, but of what? I stared up at the bough. All things die, though we will be gone away when the blooms are ice. But the unfurling and beauty is for us. Perhaps you are that white spray, he said. You keep on despite so much bitterness around you, and you seem filled with light and are lovely to me. Jotham. I smiled at him under the branch and stars, though I knew better than he that sometimes the bitter was sheathed within me as well. We glanced up at the bravery of the flowers once more before departing with Samuel and Hortus and all the earthly goods one horse could bear. And I should say thank you also to the wonderful Clive Hicks Jenkins, who made the cover of this book and all the illuminations within. And now, Sally Thomas, the author of 2 poetry books, Fallen Water and Rechildis of Walsingham, both from Finishing Line Press. She recently won the J.F. Powers Prize for Short Fiction from Dappled Things. Congratulations. Her poetry and fiction have appeared recently in Forma, Dappled Things, North American Anglican, Presence, and The Windhover. Her new book of poems, Motherland, is just out from Able Muse Press. If you buy it, fairies will sprinkle gold dust and petals onto your head or your bald head while you sleep. And now, Sally.
Thank you, Marley. And it's true about the fairies. They will sprinkle things on your head.
That goes for Jane's book too.
What?
That goes for Jane's book too.
Right, right. The fairies will sprinkle everybody if you buy our books, and Charis as well. Okay, I am going to begin. I'm just going to read sort of in order through bits and pieces of Motherland. I just read from it a couple of weeks ago, so I was looking for a few different things that I didn't read the first time. The first poem that I'm going to read is called Angelus. And the Angelus, of course, is the traditional monastic prayer that is prayed at 6 a.m., noon, and 6 p.m. traditionally, and commemorates the Annunciation. And so the sort of focus of it is that, you know, Mary saying, "Be it done unto me according to your word." And this is a pantoum kind of about prayer. And I like repetitive forms. I like the pantoum and the way that, you know, I mean, I cheat a lot. I'm a terrible cheater. I'm not a very good formalist because I break all the rules. But the way that lines repeat in the pantoum form really lends itself to contemplation, even sort of, you know, obsessive thoughts sometimes, but certainly things that you are turning over in your mind and coming back to again and again, because that's the motion of the form. So, I mean, again, I cheated a lot, so the lines don't repeat exactly. But anyway, this poem is called Angelus. Be it done, you say, a noonday habit. Unconceived, your children wait for you. Neat rows of them hang quiet in the mind's upstairs closet. Like dresses never worn, your unconceived children have been waiting. You told them that of course you'd wear them all someday. The upstairs closet's long locked, a room outside your life. Now you stand praying, as you might stand there wondering what to wear. Somehow it's never this dress, never that one. With room now in your life, you stand praying. One of them could choose you by surprise. Would it be this dress, that dress? Somehow you don't care. They're timeless, never out of style. One of them could choose you. The surprise would become you, as now sky blue becomes you. Carefree, timeless, never out of style. Be it done to me, you say, according. The words become you, though you're feeling blue, praying at your desk like this. Today, one thing may be done and not the other. Does this mean hope or does it mean despair? You're praying at your desk and it's today when anything might happen. But those dresses, dark, unworn, locked upstairs in your mind, mock your nakedness. Hope feels like despair. Still, anything can happen. Any day, you wear your noonday habit. What's done is done. A lot of the poems in this book either were written during a period of time, almost 20 years ago now, when my husband and I and our young children were living in Cambridge in the UK. And a number of other poems were written later, but look back on that time and kind of frame it. And this poem that I'm about to read riffs on an occasion that I remember. I mean, it's not very autobiographical. It's, you know, the names and details have been changed to protect the innocent. But a number of the exchanges in this poem are verbatim what I remember of this afternoon having tea. In the poem, tea is at our house, but in real life, it was somewhere else. And a woman came bringing the child that she was fostering. And we had this conversation where, among other things, she said, we'll see if he's adoptable. And I don't know, somebody said, well, what happens if he's not? And she said, the thing is, you can never keep them. They go their way. And, you know, whether that's just realism or whether there's something kind of horrifying about that, it's always stayed in my mind. And so anyway, when you hear that in the poem, that's this woman speaking. It's hard to, you know, unless you go like this, it's hard to sometimes do voices in poems. So this poem is called Foster Child. Everywhere she goes, he goes. She's brought him here to Sunday tea. He's been with me 2 weeks, she says, and shifts him deftly on her knee. The rest of us try not to see the fine blue feed tube in his nose or how his spine won't hold him up. She says, I've called him Samuel. He didn't have a name at all, just baby boy. She sets her cup out of reach by habit. He eyes it warily. Gray dusk falls over everything. Our grate laid for a fire, the book-stacked desk, the clock, the cold remains of tea the strainer holds. She says, it's late. Please, could I lay him down somewhere? That's fine. He's not particular. Settled in our travel cot, he stares at her with old brown eyes, anxious, though he never cries, she boasts, good boy. We'll see if he's adoptable. What if he's not? The thing is, you can never keep a child. They go their way. We snap the light off, leave the door ajar. In the other room, before the fire, all settled now, we sit and drink. The sherry and the evenings sink. Firelight shudders on the floor, in the darkening window where our reflected faces loom and pass like faces glancing from a bus, watching us briefly, and through these apparitions, the empty trees. Okay, this is a little happier child poem. One of my children at one stage used to ask me the question in this poem a lot. And years later, I wrote the poem some years after this question kept coming up. And I happened to read this poem in the presence of two of my children. And when it was over, one of them turned to the other and said, oh, now we know. And what this child thought he knew might not be actually what the poem says, but it was kind of funny. And you'll see why he said that once I read the poem. So this poem is called For You. Am I your favorite, you want to know? So I say yes, as every breath I take's my favorite breath. If, say, you're 8, that makes you my favorite 8-year-old. Ditto 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. You were my favorite series of summer earthquakes, my favorite live weight centered on the cervix, my favorite sight unseen that year. And so you are my favorite child right now because you stand before me, asking that my heart declare you first, you always. And it's true. It works this way. Love's strange elastic laws grant each child its undiluted part. And that, my love, is what I offer you. It's another poem for that I wrote with another one of my children in mind. I write a lot of sonnets. I don't know how obviously sonnety they are when you're hearing them, but this is another one with sort of an unconventional rhyme scheme. It's called Lookout Mountain, a prayer for my son. At midnight, I imagine you awake, shade rolled up, your window full of stars, except where those black shoulders blot them out. Big as a house, if houses were like mountains, it hunkers on the sky. And you, awake, may see it now and marvel that it sleeps when all the earth is wheeling with the stars through darkness. May you no longer mind the thought that even these rock-rooted mountains white-knuckle it, that even while it sleeps, Creation begs the driving all-night mind behind the wheel. Look out, look out, look out. I'm going to read another little poem. There are some long poems in this book, and I will read some sections of one in just a few minutes, but this is kind of a nice opportunity to read some of the smaller ones that I might otherwise have blipped over. This is another Cambridge poem. It's set right in the center. Of course, Cambridge is right on the River Cam, which flows right. It kind of encircles the town in a big loop and comes through the city center. And there's a mill pond there, and what's called Laundress Green, which is just kind of this open green space where people gather. And in the summertime, when it's beautiful, you know, the weather can be so awful for so much of the year, but when it's beautiful, it's so beautiful. And this poem describes a scene. I was just sitting out at Laundress Green one day in the sun, in probably May or June, close to June or July probably, because the English school year ends in July. And there were all these groups of school kids around from, obviously a school had come and was having some kind of day out in central Cambridge. I don't know, but I could, you know, kind of overheard all these teacher school group conversation. You know, these are a bunch of girls who were probably like 4th or 5th grade age. So you can imagine that. So this is the scene pretty much as I remember it. At the mill pond, punts knock together, chains slide back on the teak hulls. White chain mail swims the stone bridge's underside, a visual echo. Exciting, dull, 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 these girls say, circled round their teacher on the grass here, where the Cam backwashes, spills itself, light fractured into greener deeps below the race. A mill race is like the weir. Sorry, I should have said that before. Deeps below the race. Now the mill's a pasta restaurant where you can sit watching through a window in the floor, the dark waters suck and slop. But is it interesting? What's happening? What's to see? Pubs, the girls say, and there's a dog. Miss Smith's group are getting ice cream. A tall lady stands above the weir with bread in a bag, coaxing signets. Du Kleine, she calls each one. Is this interesting? Or are we merely here? The water breaks, resettles in the sun. Before I launch into some sections of my longer poem cycle, I wanted to read one more little sonnety poem that I always think of this as my Robert Louis Stevenson poem, even though I couldn't tell you like a particular Robert Louis Stevenson poem that I was trying to imitate, but I brought up my children on a number of poets. Charles Marley and I kind of bonded over our mutual love for the Cornish poet Charles Causley, and A.A. Milne, Richard Wilbur's Opposites. All these poems I read obsessively to my children, but we read a lot of A Child's Garden of Verses. And I don't know, I suppose what I wanted to channel is the kind of wonder that comes through those poems at these very everyday things that to a child are striking and strange. And I don't know, that's something that I've always loved about those children's poems, at their most beautiful. And I don't know, when I started writing this one, I just kind of wanted to channel something of that sense. So this poem is called Lamplight. Having drawn the curtains, I stepped outside and stood in the dark garden looking in, or not in exactly. The curtains hid bookshelves, wardrobe, mirror, turned back bed, all the room's clear features. Still the linen, leaked lamplight, a gold spill on the dry black stalks of black-eyed Susans beneath the window. Behind its veil, the room shone privately, as with a happiness, a mystery to me. I stood outside and wondered at that glow. The night was huge around me, full of stars. More light than theirs seemed hidden in that place, which looked at me, a masked, familiar face. I looked back, night-veiled, strange, and out of doors. Of course, I guess we're all seeing a lot of masked, familiar faces these days. I didn't consider how that poem might become remotely timely. Okay, so the last sort of bit that I want to read is from a poem cycle that makes up the end of Motherland, as well as it was its own chapbook before it was included in this book. And I'll just read you the little introduction to it, and then I'm going to read a few sections from it. I better kind of keep an eye on the time. So the introduction says, in AD 1061, in Norfolk, not far from the North Sea coast, a Saxon widow named Richeldis de Faversh, lady of the manor of Walsingham, prayed for and received 3 visions. In these visions, the Virgin Mary appeared to her and showed her the house at Nazareth, where she had received the angel Gabriel's unexpected visit. According to the legend, the Virgin gave Richeldis the exact dimensions of this holy house and a directive to build a replica of it at Walsingham. This Richeldis did, though not without some trials. As the legend has it, she tried 3 times unsuccessfully to have the house built, according to what seemed to have been unclear directions concerning its location. After a night of prayer, she awoke to find that angels had built the house while she slept, on a site where a holy well was found to bubble from the ground. Throughout the Middle Ages, Walsingham, called England's Nazareth, remained a pilgrimage site, second only to Canterbury in its volume of pious traffic. Under Henry VIII, however, the king's own barefoot pilgrimages to Walsingham notwithstanding, the shrine was destroyed in 1538, its priests executed, and its devotion suppressed. A Roman Catholic shrine in the medieval Slipper Chapel was restored in 1934. An Anglican shrine featuring a rebuilt holy house on the site of the miraculous spring had opened in the 1920s. And during our time in England, we visited Walsingham. My own relationship with piety and all of that was somewhat uncomfortable at that time. But I found that once I had left, I mean, while I was there, I kind of couldn't wait to get away. But once I had left, I couldn't stop thinking about it and wanting to make it in language, even though I didn't know what it would be. So I'm just going to read we're coming to the end of our time, I realize, but I just want to read a few sections. This is a fairly long poem cycle that features different voices that speak at different stages of Walsingham's history. I mean, just completely made up. I just, imagined these people at different times, interspersed with a narrative voice that comes in to say some things, and the voice of Richeldis herself, whom I imagine in the aftermath of having had this intense mystical kind of experience. And I guess the thought in my mind is, well, like, what do you do with the rest of your life once you have had an experience like that? And so that's sort of where Richeldis is coming from. I'm going to read this little section that is her voice. Richeldis, circa 1080. It's now, at this time of year, I expect her. I sit in my low 3-legged chair, spinning, spring firelight on the floor, pale weather, pear tree wreathed in dim blooms, the outer door propped as if at any moment someone might speak my name or listen. As I sing to myself, ich singe, and watch this wool wind itself into something useful. My hands that draw the twisted strands out long, blue-veined, knob-knuckled, stiffening. My warm-flanked hounds sigh and twitch in the strewn rushes, all my grounds, little lambent curve of river, new-leafed trees catching at the wind as it hurries in from the sea, hummocky meadow where one dun cow grazes her own shadow beneath the moon. Swathed in time, this mortal earth sleeps alone. I'm going to read this little short section. Again, this whole shrine sort of turns on the Annunciation and the house where the Annunciation happened. So this is well, again, it's not really an Annunciation poem, but it's a poem that obviously references that. Duru, door. Does an angel need a door? Or is he simply there where you thought no one was? We're taught to count our guardian angels, each a person occupying not space exactly. He's not a physical presence. Perhaps it's enough to say we count them. He more than counts. He wears his name like a cloak of feathers. Gabriel, garment of fire, wind, a smell like fear or snow, that sharp blue outdoor scent. Who wouldn't startle seeing him suddenly being that thing we believe in, made of knowing and of love? Let's see, I think I will just I will read one more Raquelda's voice and then one final little section. This is again, Raquelda's circa 1080, still sort of longing for the experience that she had had. To sit companionably, to say, and how is it with you? While the slow embers tick in the fireplace, the loom clacks and sighs, the room rests like a cat curled on the wide windowsill of the world, looking out into the strangeness of the night from its place of purring peace. Another woman to riddle through the dark hours with, to sit in little wells of silence with, when speech falters and each reads with sure blind fingers the text of her own weaving and doesn't mind what happens next. And this last one, the sections of this poem move in and out of our own era and through different eras in history. I'm sort of sticking close to that, well, this era when Raqueldis was said to live is you know, that moment right before the Norman conquest and the sort of whole, you know, remaking of the English language, the remaking of English society. So there's kind of a little before and after for her of that the visions belong to that before time. And in this last poem, it's set in the year 1101, kind of arbitrarily, but it is. And someone is dying. It could be Raqueldis, it might not be, but the voice is the voice of a housemaid who is a Saxon and speaks Old English as opposed to Norman French. And to sort of suggest that, I mean, actually, I'm kind of a poser with all this Old English stuff. I'm not an Old English scholar, and I don't know, I do speak French, but I don't know that much about Norman French. But you'll hear the two different words for water, l'eau, which is the French word for water, and then water, which is my approximation of the Old English pronunciation of that familiar word. So this section is called Brimfugol, which is Old English for seabird, 1101. In the morning, I hear them crying as if they had lost their way. I have never seen the sea. This bright morning, my mistress is dying and taking her time about it. I have come from the dim house into the springing green of the well garden to skim green scum and frog spawn from the otherwise clean well water, not the holy well. Yesterday, Father Gervais anointed her. She could not swallow. I think the very ill know that soon they will be offered more than they can hold, that Christ himself will feed them from his own torn breast. Christ the bird will tear himself and bleed, and truly they at last will feast. The housefolk here don't like it when I loiter too long here with the sky-high voices crying low, low above the homely water. All the while this earth, green, heedless, rejoices. And that's the end. Thank you all for listening. Let me look at the chat. I had said maybe Marley and Jane want to unmute themselves so that they can talk. Looking to see if anybody has any voices. Lots and lots of great great comments and feedback. But if there's anything anybody would like to ask us, we're here to answer all your questions. Let's see, I'm going to try to unfull screen this so I can see the chat a little bit better. Well, it's been wonderful that all of you took this time out of your afternoon to join us. We've been just delighted to be able to read to you. It's been so much fun to be able to put this together, and you know, Zoom technology is amazing. I would be really interested. If there are any other writers out there who would be interested in putting together some more readings? This reading in the air thing kind of seems like it could be a lot of fun. So you can, if anybody is interested, my website is sally-thomas.com, and I have contact info there, and I don't always have to read, but I would be delighted to, to put together some more readings, because these are a lot of fun.
I would just like to say that today was Sally's idea. She invited us. She was at the controls, at the Zoom controls, and
see how the recording turns out, but
it really was an awful lot of fun, and I'm grateful to you, Sally, for doing this.
Well, thank you for wanting to play, and thank you, Marley, too.
Thank you, Sally.
Yes. Okay. Well, I think probably we'd all like to get on with our afternoon. So many thanks to all of you again for being here, and we'll see you next time.
You're done already?
What?
I just showed up because I'm out in California and I
Oh,
forgot.
no.
And
The time zone.
Yeah.
Well,
I do that.
yeah. Well, we did record it, so
Well, shoot.
okay.
I thought you were starting at 3.
Yeah, Eastern.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, glad you were here. I'm glad you were here at all.
It's 1:21 here.
All right, right.
All right. Well, I'm putting together some readings myself. So.
Well, great. Okay, well, thank you all. I think we will we'll end this now.
Okay.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.